All right, well, today is the day of evangelism. This is session 2 of Today is the Day, making the most of the time you have. And we're going to be interacting with very familiar passages in this, Matthew 28:18 through 20, and Matthew 9:36 to 38. And there are going to be some cross-references as well. But we're really going to be looking at the reality that answering the call to share the gospel requires intentionality and commitment. It's kind of like going to the gym. Unless you're intentional about it, unless you're committed to it, you're not going to go to the gym. And sometimes that frustrates me because I wish I could just get up and have this desire to go to the gym or go running, but that's another story for another time. The lesson goal for this, for the head, we want them to become aware of the need to share the gospel. In the heart, we want them to commit to sharing the gospel, and we want them to go out and do it as well. So there's the head, heart, and hands. There are 2 different resources that you can do one of 2 things for. You can either print off the resources, which are found on the Google Drive link. You can find that link by going to kreigtodd.com/todayistheday, and there are some links there to get you to that Google Drive. But also in the back of their student book, they're going to have both of these resources, starting the conversation, which was developed by Lifeway, and then the 5-sentence gospel, which was developed by Justin Knight, a pastor in Walthall County. The 3 truths for this one is that Jesus has all authority, Jesus has commanded us to share the gospel, and He has empowered us to share the gospel. And so we're going to spend time today talking with students about the reality that Jesus has called us to share the gospel and the reality that we need to be doing it as well. Whenever we talk about sharing the gospel, sometimes we get so focused on the fact that people need Jesus, and we say that that's our motivating basis for sharing the gospel. But the truth is, the only motivating basis that matters is that Jesus has said, share the gospel. And so how are we sharing the gospel? Are we being intentional about it? Are we doing it? Or are we giving it lip service? Unfortunately, most of us are content with giving it lip service. In fact, as I do this video now, we are in December of 2020, and we have been in lockdown or quarantine or scaled back since early March of this year. And I have not interacted with pretty much anybody other than those I serve with on staff at my church or the people at a restaurant that I pick up carry out at. And so I understand 2020 has been different, but how are we finding ways to share the gospel with those we encounter? And so we're going to walk through this with students, and we're going to talk about the reality that Jesus has called us to share the gospel, and the call is powerful because He has all authority. You know, we don't take orders from people who don't have authority over us. That's just the reality. I remember when I was a kid, my brother would sometimes be sent with a message saying, Mom and Dad said, do X, Y, Z. Well, on the days that I decided to believe my brother and he was accurate, everything worked out well. On the days that I decided to not believe my brother, I soon discovered that oftentimes he was sent with a message and I disobeyed my parents, and that did not always end well for me. And so the command is powerful because Jesus has all authority. Remember, He says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. And so you're going to talk this out with students. You're going to talk to them about the authority of Jesus. And remember, this also goes back to the sovereignty of God. Because God is over all things, He has the authority to command His creatures to go and do. So Jesus has all authority, and He has commanded us to share the gospel. In the military, when an officer gives a subordinate a command, they are to do it. Unless it's illegal, that's a different story. But when an officer gives a command, you are to follow through with that command. And you're going to talk through that with your students. You'll notice it says, go therefore and make disciples. Baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe everything I've commanded you. That is the command, to go and make disciples. And remember, you and your students, and myself included, we don't have to go and become an international missionary to share the gospel. We can share the gospel right here at home, as we're in Walmart, as we're at the baseball field, as we're at the football game, as we're at work. We can be missionaries in the context that God has placed us. We are to be salt and light. That passage in Matthew 5, we often say that And we don't really explain it really, but we just say go and be salt and light. But think about salt. You put salt on your food and it enhances the flavor. It brings out the flavor. You turn the light on in a dark room, guess what happens? The darkness goes out. Darkness and light cannot exist, and putting light in a dark situation changes everything. So he has all authority. He's commanded us to share the gospel. Not only that, he's also empowered us to share the gospel. The truth is, sharing the gospel can be a daunting thing. That's just the reality. But he has empowered us. The Holy Spirit of God is with us, in us, and upon us, teaching, helping us to obey the things of Christ. Charles Stanley has explained it that way. And as we think about that, as we think about sharing the gospel, we need to ask them, have they ever shared the gospel? If they haven't, why? If they have, what was that like? We need to ask them to think through how they can share the gospel in their schools. We don't want to be the guy that beats people over the head with the Bible, but we do want to be the person who people look to for hope and encouragement, because we are speaking the message of hope and encouragement, and they're not finding the hope in us, but rather in the one who gave us the message of hope and encouragement, and that is Jesus Christ. You're going to challenge your students to pray for their lost friends. The reality is, whether they are in a Christian school or a public school, there are people who are lost. Even if we are in a church service, there are still people who are lost and do not know Jesus. So we're going to challenge them to pray for their lost friends and to seek opportunities to share the gospel with them. And then we do want to provide an opportunity for them to practice sharing the gospel. And so in the first session, they wrote out their testimony. And your testimony is a very powerful tool. Telling the story of how Jesus has changed your life personally can be an awesome way to introduce people to Jesus. And so they can practice sharing their own testimony, or they can use some of these resources. They can use the 5-sentence gospel. They can use starting the conversation. And on the starting the conversation and the 5-sentence gospel, there is another video that explains how to use those, and I encourage you to check it out. In fact, in this session, you're encouraged to explain how to use these resources to your students. You can summarize it, or you can play the video that's going to talk about that. Totally up to you. But friends, as we encourage our students to share the gospel with those they encounter, may we encourage them on. May we constantly ask them to tell us the stories of it. But may we also be people who go out and share the gospel as well. May we seek ways to tell others the story of Jesus. I'll tell you this one story as we close this video. I'm an LSU fan, and I love fishing shirts. In fact, under this sweater right now, I've got a white fishing shirt on. I just love fishing shirts. But I have an LSU fishing shirt. And of course, you know, it's got LSU. And I was at the Boston restaurant in Amite, Louisiana 2 years ago. And as I was sitting there with some friends, this waitress came up, and we began to talk to her and just start up a conversation. And she said, well, I go to LSU. I said, that's great. And I was wearing my LSU shirt. And I said, do you know what LSU stands for? She said, Louisiana State University. And I said, no, it stands for Love Saved Us. And love has a name. His name is Jesus. And I just began to tell her the gospel. And it sounds corny. I know it sounds corny. But we need to seek ways to share the gospel. The only thing, there's a lot of things that can limit us from sharing the gospel. First being our disobedience, but when it comes to ways of sharing the gospel, oftentimes it's our imagination that limits us. So friends, we'll see you in the next video. For today is the day of discipleship.